Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Components for Enhancing Career Experience and Reducing Trauma, CE-CERT, led by Elisa Wilburn, who is a clinical psychologist and assistant professor in the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences Department of Psychiatry, and Kelly Hammond, a trauma treatment training specialist. Both are my colleagues on the ARBEST team. My name is Laura Landers, and I'll be your webinar moderator for today. Before we get started, I want to let you know a little bit about the ARBEST program and do some housekeeping announcements. Arkansas Building Effective Services for Trauma, or ARBEST, is a state-funded program at the UAMS Psychiatric Research Institute, and our aim is to improve mental health services for children and families who've experienced trauma. We work closely with multiple partners to build a more trauma-informed state, and we're probably best known for providing training to mental health professionals on treatments that are effective with helping children and families recover from trauma. A few housekeeping announcements. If you have questions throughout the webinar, you can type them into the Q&A, and we will get to these questions at the end of the webinar. You can also use the chat feature for any comments or responses, but make sure if you have a question to put it in the Q&A so that we are sure to see it. If you're interested in receiving a CEU, just be sure to stick around to the very end, and I'll give some more instruction on how to obtain that. We're recording this webinar, which we'll upload to the ARBEST YouTube channel. We have other previously recorded webinars there too, so you can check those out. And don't forget to like us on ARBEST Facebook. We frequently post upcoming webinars, training opportunities, and other resources. So today we have two presenters, which I'm really excited about. First, I'll introduce Elisa Wilburn. She is a clinical psychologist and assistant professor in the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, Department of Psychiatry. Dr. Wilburn is a certified parent-child interaction therapist and PCIT with an agency trainer. She's also a certified therapist in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. Additionally, Dr. Wilburn is co-leading the development of a dialectical behavioral therapy program for teens and their families at the Child Study Center at UAMS, and recently completed training requirements in the collaborative assessment and management of suicidality. Dr. Wilburn is also an in-house trainer for the components of enhancing career experience and reducing trauma to help others attain and sustain wellness in their career. Welcome, Dr. Wilburn. Now I'll also introduce you to our other presenter, Kelly Hammond. Kelly Hammond is the trauma treatment training specialist for ARBEST. Kelly received her master's degree in social work from the University of Arkansas in Little Rock in 2008. She has extensive experience in providing evidence-based treatments to children and families who've experienced trauma and is nationally certified in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, for which she is a training consultant and in the process of becoming a national trainer. Kelly is also a child-parent psychotherapy rostered therapist and state trainer, certified infant mental health therapist, and 0 to 3 certified trainer in DC 0 through 5, and a state trainer for components for enhancing clinical experience and reducing trauma. Welcome, Kelly. Now I'm going to let Kelly take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here with us today. I think it's important first to acknowledge that what we're going to talk about today during our webinar is simply an overview of components for enhancing career experience and reducing trauma, or CE-CERT. There are so many more aspects to CE-CERT that we're going to be able to cover in just this 1 hour together. And so towards the end of the webinar today, we're going to give you more information about how to engage in or seek out and request a CE-CERT training if you're interested in more information. So again, this is simply an overview to see if this is something that you're interested in learning more about. So an important aspect of CE-CERT is that it is not a typical self-care approach. It is a framework that offers a set of skills that you can use real time throughout the day to be healthier, to be more excited about your work, and to sustain you in your career. So before we really get into the overview of these skills, there are a few things that we need to have a shared understanding about in terms of CE-CERT. The first is that within CE-CERT, burnout, as we typically and traditionally think of it, is a myth. So what this means is that the way that we traditionally think of it, the work wears us down to this withered employee that sort of barely pulls themselves over that retirement finish line. But what we know is that burnout actually doesn't operate that way. The highest rate of burnout is actually during your apprenticeship. This is a period of time in which we tend to act very competent, or try to act very competent, when really nothing is coming very easily. It's quite effortful. And we're just sort of realizing the full weight and responsibility of what it is that we do. And we don't yet really know how to do it. And so we pretend and we act like we know when we don't. And so in reality, it isn't the work. It's this extraneous sort of expenditure on pretending to be something that we're not. It's the dailiness of what we do. It's the paperwork, the emails, the policies, the procedures. It's these things outside of the actual work that are wearing us down into burnout. Another principle is that compassion fatigue is a misnomer. It's the wrong thing to call it, because compassion is not fatiguing. Compassion is actually energizing. If you think about a time when you had true compassion for another person, is it exhausting, or is it sort of bittersweet? Maybe you feel tired after that interaction, but probably not depleted. Genuine empathy causes us to have a rise, an elevation in the felt energy that we have. And it's important to recognize that there's a difference between empathy and having poor boundaries, or taking on the responsibility for another person's feelings and emotions. We have an understanding that stress can be good for us. In fact, it's essential to satisfaction and effectiveness. It can be motivating. And there's a difference between healthy and toxic stress. And finally, that a work-life balance is not attainable. And the more you try to find that balance, most likely the more out of balance you're going to feel. The idea of a work-life balance means that there's a work you and a life you, and that good things only happen when you're away from work, and that work only offers bad experiences. Really, it makes more sense to stop wasting our energy on finding a work-life balance and use it on these more sort of achievable, helpful skills that we can use throughout the day. Usually when we talk about self-care, what happens is we maximize the problem. We talk a lot about the prevalence and impact of burnout, but then we minimize the solution. We talk about going home and taking bubble baths or having margaritas with friends. What is really nice about CE-CERT skills is that they're acquirable. You can learn them, you can practice them, they can become yours. And again, we're not talking about self-care or activities that you would engage in at the end of the day to recover so that you would have enough to be able to get up and go to work and do it all again, because that means you're in a cycle in which you're never out of that deficit. Instead, these skills are things that you can do real time so that you never get into that deficit. It's a way to thrive within the work instead of survive it. Not only are these skills acquirable, but they also work together and support one another. And the overarching concept of CE-CERT is conscious oversight. And what this means is paying attention to ourselves with deliberateness, to how we're feeling, the effect the work is having on us, and the narratives that we're creating about it, so that we can make continuous adjustments or rebalance throughout our day, rather than waiting to do self-care when we're away from work. Not just anyone can do what we do. We have a very particular set of skills that make us uniquely able to do what we do. Who better than you? Who better than us to support people when they're going through hard times? But without being careful with ourselves, we will not be able to sustain. CE-CERT provides for us a framework and skills to be able to learn how to begin being careful with ourselves. So we're going to start with the first skill domain.
All right. Hi, everyone. So as Kelly mentioned, CE-CERT has 5 skill domains, and this is an overview of this framework today. So you might leave this webinar feeling like you're itching for a little bit more. We're hoping to leave you with maybe a couple nuggets today for each of these domains and things that you can integrate into the work that you do. But I'm first going to talk about experiential engagement. And so experiential engagement is all about how do we engage in the feelings, all the feelings that our work comes with. So I'm going to make the assumption that everyone on the webinar today has something about their job, maybe more than one thing, that brings up unpleasant emotions. Sometimes we avoid aversive tasks, tasks that are boring. We avoid maybe difficult conversations with coworkers or supervisors. We are often formally taught, and we teach ourselves, to avoid strong and unpleasant feelings. And what we know is trying to avoid these unpleasant feelings, but also trying to fully experience the pleasant aspects of our job and experience the pleasant feelings of our job kind of sets the stage for disengagement. Because if we are going to disengage ourselves from unpleasant emotional experiences, we're also not going to experience the pleasant ones because of that. Our work is neither absolutely dreadful, and it's also not absolutely satisfying. So I want you to ask yourself if you believe in this idea that we don't get to choose what we feel. We can only choose whether to feel. So if you're open to feeling all of the feelings that you could possibly have within your work, you have to be open to feel all of those feelings, the unpleasant ones and the unpleasant ones. See if I can advance here. So you'll notice there is a beach ball on this slide, if you can see the slide. There's a beach ball on a body of water. And kind of want you to ask yourself, have you ever been in a situation where you've tried to push an inflated beach ball under the water? I know I have tried and have failed miserably. Now I want you to ask yourself, how well did that work? Our emotions kind of operate similarly in that if we try to push an inflated beach ball underwater, it's going to pop back up, just like our emotions do. If we try to push them away, they're still there. It may just be a matter of time as to when they come back up. And the energy that we expend trying to suppress feelings and trying to push away feelings actually is more unhelpful than not. And what we know is that suppressed feelings are expressed still in indirect ways. We really can't avoid it. And so if you're unwilling to experience an emotion, you're going to feel it still, and it might leak out in different ways. So we think about experiential engagement as allowing ourselves to feel the emotions in our work, and it's much like we are turning the stress response on. So each domain in CE-CERT has a specific set of skills associated with them that help enhance our ability to to kind of these different domains. And so we won't be able to get into all of the skills today since this is an overview. But the skills associated with experiential engagement is all about setting an intention, being aware of the emotions that you tend to avoid, allowing these things to happen, allowing emotions to metabolize as they are made to do. So I want you to ask yourself a couple of questions related to experiential engagement, and kind of ponder on these. But what emotions do you avoid experiencing in your work? What are the situations or the tasks that bring about emotions that you tend to actively avoid? And what are your lean away narratives? What are the narratives? What are the stories that you tell yourself about experiencing certain emotions? Right? Some people think if I allow myself to experience all of these emotions, I'm going to open the floodgates. I'm going to feel overwhelmed. I'm going to feel burned out. I don't want to ruin my mood. And what we know is that an unbroken heart, a heart that's not willing to be broken by some of the tragedy and some of the sadness and the stress that comes with the work that we do, cannot survive a career in a helping profession. So I'm going to move on to our second domain of CE-CERT, which is decreasing rumination. So I want you to think for a minute about your mental happy place. This could be a beach vacation. Maybe that's coming up for some of you soon. Maybe it's a memory of your child laughing. Maybe it's your dog. For some of you, you might have this happy place as your desktop screensaver. And what we know is that screensavers come on when a computer has been inactive. And our brains are very much like computers and have screensaver functions as well. So when does our brain go into screensaver mode? It's actually a lot of the time and without any effort on our part. So our brain has lots of little screensaver images that are stored and represent all the experiences that we've had in life. And these automatically become active. And the truth is that for some of us, the way our brain is wired, we have different biological kind of vulnerabilities and tendencies. That combined with maybe higher stress, our brain is not going to select that beach vacation. It's not going to select the memory of your child laughing or your dog, something silly that your dog did. It's going to generate screensaver images that represent more stressful or unpleasant situations. It might be that that lesson didn't go very well, or that staff meeting kind of went off the rails, or that conversation with that parent or this child just felt really off and it was very frustrating. And this happens most often when we are in situations when we're not focused on something outside of ourselves. When our attention is not focused on the external environment. And for some of us, these screensaver images kind of stick around in a really unproductive way. And so that term that we use to describe some of these negatively valent thoughts and images is rumination. So what is rumination? Right, some of us know about rumination as the act or the process of regurgitating and chewing previously swallowed food. But as you could probably already guess, that's not what we're talking about today. We're not talking about regurgitated food. We are talking about regurgitated thoughts. So the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of rumination is this obsessive thinking about an idea or a situation or a choice that we made especially when it's interfering with our day-to-day functioning in life. And we know that when this happens for prolonged periods of time, or when this happens pretty frequently, we know that that's associated with feelings of depression, and really kind of feelings of unease. And I want to highlight here that rumination is different than problem solving. Rumination is an unproductive process, whereas problem solving is more active in that we are generating meaning from an experience. We are gathering mentally kind of what we've learned, or maybe thinking about steps for the future and how we might do something differently. That's a different process than rumination. So you might have noticed this little hamster in a wheel image. For some of us, we are prone to this like mental spinning. We reproduce experiences in our mind. And when we do that, we also rekindle the feelings associated with that experience. And so if you're prone to ruminating, we kind of think of this as a hamster in a wheel. We are caught in this cycle of rehashing experiences. It brings up the emotions that come with that experience, and that then still leads to us thinking about it. And it can be this loop that we get caught in. And this is because we as human beings have a really sophisticated and lovely brain that allows us to replay these unpleasant experiences. Not all mammals have this ability. So we think about a situation, we feel the feels, we continue thinking about it, we continue to feel, and it goes on and on. So instead of being caught in this wheel, our goal is to experience our life as if it were a wave. Emotions come and go, just like waves come and go. So reducing rumination allows us to leave experiences in the moment rather than having them stay with us for maybe hours or days. You might be thinking that I just talked to you all about how we're supposed to experience our emotions. We're supposed to let these feelings happen. We're supposed to welcome these experiences. And yes, that has to happen. And we also have to develop skills that allow us to leave experiences and thoughts and emotions that come with them out the door. We allow them to come, and we also allow them to go. So these are the skills for reducing rumination. And as we're starting to think about this, one thing to leave here today with is, do you know if and when you ruminate? Reducing rumination is very much like starting to turn the stress response off. We're shutting the door on previous experiences that are in the past. So if you know whether or not you're a ruminator, if you're not, that's great. These skills may not be as relevant for you. But just a couple of questions for you to consider is if and when you do ruminate. I know I tend to ruminate on my commute to and from work. That's where my brain tends to go other places. And what activity completely consumes your attention? A helpful skill in sort of short circuiting and breaking that mental spin and getting out of that hamster in a wheel situation is engaging in an activity that captures your attention, where you're in the zone. And it doesn't take very long for that to happen, for that spin to stop. And remember that CE-CERT skills are transactional, like Kelly mentioned earlier. So if you know that you are prone to ruminating, I want you to think about how much easier it might be for you to welcome emotional experiences, that experiential engagement piece, if you know that you have the skills and the confidence to then turn those off. With that, I'm going to pass it back over to Kelly to talk about conscious narrative.
Alyssa mentioned earlier that we can't sustain a career in this field, especially in trauma work, if we have armored ourselves, armored our hearts. And within this field, what that armor is constructed of is often narratives. So conscious narrative is a skill domain that gives us space to ask ourselves, what story, what narrative am I telling myself about the work that I'm doing and the intense experiences that happen in that work? So how do we talk to ourselves and others about these experiences? And this is a skill that I think is pretty clearly demonstrated in some ways in my home. So I'm going to share that with you now. Almost every single day, our mail carrier, Jay, visits our home, comes to our porch where our mailbox lives, and delivers our mail. And almost every single day, our dog, Maggie, tries to break through the glass door and eat Jay every day. Despite the fact that it happens on a consistent basis, despite the fact that this is a totally innocuous event that happens all the time, Maggie has the same reaction now for almost 10 years. And so you can probably imagine the story, the narrative I tell myself about this. It can be pretty frustrating as a person who works from home. You can probably also imagine what the narrative Jay, the mail carrier, tells himself about this experience, which could maybe be pretty intense for him. What I had not really considered much until recently was what's the narrative that Maggie tells herself about this experience. Because from her perspective, on a daily basis, she lives her vocation. She successfully defends her family from an intruder and chases him away every day. So an important part of conscious narrative is understanding that the narrators in our heads come from our lived experience and our perspective. They do not develop in a vacuum. So we have to consider, how often do our jobs remind us of our personal mission? How often do you allow yourself to get to be a Maggie? And the answer to this is in some way determined by your conscious narrative. Narratives are constant, but they are not always conscious. So our goal here is to bring them into our awareness. And to do that, we really do need to look at the three parts: the before, the during, and the after. This is because our brains have evolved to make sense of the world in this way. And we know that when we're able to move through all three of these parts, then we can start to resolve stress and our autonomic arousal can calm down. And this is particularly true for intense experiences. So the before is the antecedent narrative. This is what we tell ourselves to establish expectations. It's what you tell yourself about stress before it happens. Another way to think of it is, what are the thoughts running through your head when you're driving into work every day? Then we have the during. This is your concurrent narrative. This is your self-talk about a stressful event when it's happening. So what you tell yourself about the sensation and experience of stress when it's occurring. And then finally, we have our consolidation narrative. And this is how we really put the stressor in the past and begin to make sense of what happened. It's what we tell ourselves about the why of what happened. And so if you were to do an activity where you drew a circle on a scrap sheet of paper and you made that circle into a pie chart, and you divided that pie chart into the proper proportions of how much of your job sort of contains activities that produce feelings of maybe stress or anxiety or fear or distress, busy work, boredom, excitement, joy, pleasure, you would draw your narrative. It also helps answer the question, is what I tell myself about my work in general an accurate statement, or am I just making a broad stroke over the whole thing and losing the nuance? Because often what we do, because it's human nature, is that we make a broad stroke over the experience of our jobs, and that makes us lose those times that are not negatively veiled with emotion. So we say things like, my job is stressful, and then we lose the experience and the aspects of our jobs that are in fact enjoyable or sweet or meaningful. And so when we do activities that help us distinguish between broad strokes, my job is stressful, and nuance, my job can be stressful at times, then we lose sort of the rationale and the vocation part of why we do what we do. This is not to say that you should subscribe to the idea that you should just think happy thoughts. That's not accurate. It's not true. It's not sustainable. It will fail you. You have to keep your narratives based in reality. Sometimes you're still going to carry a heavy burden. Probably on a daily basis, you'll be carrying a heavy burden. And it's not the load that breaks you down, it's the way you carry it. Or rather, it's not the work that we do, it's the narrative we tell ourselves about the work and who we allow to help us carry that burden. And so now we're going to hear about the emotional labor that can come with our work.
All right. So the question in this fourth skill domain of reducing emotional labor is, how do we sustain this quote unquote hard job that you have? How do we avoid looking and feeling like this fox, if you can see him on the right? What we know is that true career sustainability is found in learning ways to make your work less effortful and more enjoyable. So ultimately, you will stay in your job because you like the way that you feel when you're doing your job. This requires that we reduce the amount of what we call emotional labor that our job requires. And I will talk more about that here in a minute. So this is a common narrative, this battery sort of metaphor that attempts to explain or convey this idea that we have to recover from work, where our energy and our charge for work is limited in supply and has to be recharged during the evenings and during the weekend or whenever you are off work. And I'd like to offer you a different and perhaps more accurate narrative of how energy actually operates in our lives generally. So in reality, energy operates in more of an open system where energy is exchanged. So in our work, some of what we are doing is expending energy. And other times, what we're doing is energizing. It's bringing us energy. I bet, or I would hope that a lot of you on this webinar today can think about a moment or an experience within your work that you left feeling energized. As a society, we have adopted and sort of maintained this notion that work is associated with pain and effort and stress, and that leisure or time outside of work is associated with joy and no stress and no effort. And that this sort of distorts our reality. It distorts our narrative of what we're actually experiencing. I would bet that all of us have experienced a time in which something was going on in our personal life that was maybe more stressful than something that we're experiencing at work, and vice versa. So while this is a more accurate description of how energy actually operates, we have to figure out then, how do we derive more energy than we expend to help us sustain in our career? So for some of you, you might say that your job is hard because maybe it requires you to expend energy physically. Maybe you're having to physically move around a lot. Maybe you're having to do some heavy lifting of things. Maybe sometimes people have chronic illness that makes it really physically challenging, right? But sometimes people will say that their jobs are hard because they're emotionally demanding. That we are doing emotion work. And it's our efforts to manage our emotions that make this work hard. So emotional labor is a term from the occupational psychology and sociology fields, and it's defined as this process of regulating our experienced and displayed emotions to present in a professionally desired way during kind of our interpersonal interactions or experiences at work. So in other words, emotional labor is the effort to suppress feelings, which is tied in with that experiential avoidance piece, or it's our efforts to change feelings or act in a way that does not match with how we actually feel. All right. So an example that we all might be able to relate to some extent is going into a meeting and acting like and presenting like, you're so happy to be there. This is great. When inside you're just thinking, this is real stupid. This could have been an email. Why are we here? Right? The way that you present, the way that you act is not consistent with how you really feel. And we know that it takes work to appear how we want to appear. That genuine experiences are actually not emotionally laborious. And when how we present matches with how we feel, it actually is energizing. So this professionally desired image is usually people trying to project these 3 C's: competent, caring, and calm. We generally want to present as if we know what we're doing, we're really caring, and that we're calm, that we're not in distress. And if we really feel those things, it takes no effort to appear that way. The emotional labor is when we're trying to appear competent, or we're trying to act like we care when we really don't feel like we care, or when we are just panicking inside, but we're trying to appear really calm. Kelly talked earlier about the idea of compassion fatigue being a misnomer. That's because if we truly feel compassion, we know that there's parts of our brain that are in the pleasure centers of our brain, responsible for pleasant feelings, are activated when we're truly feeling compassion. So genuine empathy is replenishing, it's not fatiguing. So there are a few skills associated with reducing emotional labor. We have compassion as a skill, and yes, compassion is a skill, it's not a virtue. Wholeheartedness and intentional learning. So, couple questions to ask yourself. What is your compassion tax? What do the people that you serve or the people that you work with have to do to pay their tax in order to earn your compassion? Do they need to show up early? Do they need to be more motivated? Do they need to smell nice? Do they need to tell you how appreciative they are for working with them or for all that you do? When we let go of that compassion tax, it reduces the emotional strain and provides you with energy. There's actually a lot more we can do to activate or switch on compassion that we won't have time to go into today. But I want you to think about that if you have compassion tax. Another thing to think about is what can you learn more about? There's this idea of intentional learning. And sometimes when we gain mastery over a certain task, or maybe there's a domain of your work that you'd like to feel more confident or competent in, what might that be? What can you do to make dreaded tasks easier? Because the idea here is that it's really hard to hate something that you're really good at. And when you find that mastery and when you make things easier and when you feel more competent, it's again energy producing. Even though it takes a little more energy at the beginning to learn something new. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kelly to get us through the last domain for today.
So we're going to talk about parasympathetic recovery, but to do that, we need just a real quick biology lesson. So we have a thing called the autonomic nervous system, and this is what regulates our involuntary body processes, including things like our heart rate, our blood pressure, digestion, respiration, those sorts of things. Within our autonomic nervous system, we have three distinct divisions. We're going to talk about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Usually when we talk about stress, we almost exclusively focus on the sympathetic nervous system. And this is what gives us our stress response or our fear response. So that fight, flight, freeze, that's where this comes from. What we don't do a good job of is talking about our parasympathetic recovery system. This is what turns off that fear response or that stress response. And that's a pretty important aspect of staying healthy in trauma work. Not only is recovery important because compassion towards others can only happen when we're in our own emotional green zone, or in other words, when we parasympathetically recover, that would make it able for us to experience compassion. Because when you're in your fight or flight, when you're in a distress or fear response, we can't tap into our compassion. So it's important to parasympathetically recover for that reason. It's also important because you as a human being, as a person, are important and deserve to recover from stress. If we fail to engage in parasympathetic recovery during the day, because we're metaphorically sort of holding our breath, then stress will accumulate and then be experienced as sort of one continuous event all day long, instead of waves that rise and fall like we're supposed to experience stress. And this is where we get into a problem with a work-life balance. Is your work of such little consequence that you can just leave it at the office? The goal in traditional self-care is to leave stress at the office, but that also means you're likely waiting until 5 o'clock to sort of take that metaphorical inhale, exhale, because you've been holding your breath all day with this broad layer of stress. Reality is sometimes your work sucks and sometimes it doesn't. Our work isn't only stress. It has stressful moments, but it also has moments that are calm and enjoyable and rewarding and beautiful. Sometimes your evenings and weekends at home are enjoyable and relaxing, and y'all, sometimes they're not. So the goal of parasympathetic recovery is to allow for that natural rise and fall of the stress response throughout the day instead of waiting to be away from work to recover. If we feel like we can engage in parasympathetic recovery at work, then our narrative about work will begin to change as well. So here's how we do it. There are actually two targets in parasympathetic recovery skills. The first is to improve our skillfulness in noticing our stress response and activating recovery. This again allows that natural rise and fall, those waves of stress and recovery. It also creates a sense of space during the day that provides openings to recover. So creating this space in the day for that metaphorical exhale of the stress is intentional. It does not happen on accident. It has to be intentionally built into your day, and you have to intentionally and consciously engage in it. So that means cutting out those sad desk lunches and trying not to eat alone in your car. It means having some rituals and routines between sessions, if that's available. It means taking care of bodily needs when you need to. It means end of work day activities that help you find gratitude and enjoyment in your work. And when we begin to intentionally incorporate these sense of space into our dailiness, it begins to become part of our narrative. We make these intentional planned moments of recovery part of the narrative so that our antecedent, our before narrative includes that in the story that we tell ourselves. So on the drive into work, we aren't thinking about an entire day's worth of a stressful event. We're thinking about getting into that first sense of space that we are going to intentionally create. We have to maintain conscious oversight of our level of distress. We have to check in with ourselves and drop back into our bodies. And this has to happen during the workday. That involves developing a deliberate awareness of the effect that stress is having on us emotionally and physiologically. So we have to notice that stress events have caused us distress, if that's true. And we have to do this as they happen, as opposed to only later after it's all accumulated. When we're able to recognize that stress is an event, then we can also begin to acknowledge that it has a beginning and an end. When we're able to acknowledge the beginning and the end of stress, then we can also begin to notice times when we are not stressed. This is often in contrast to how we tend to conceptualize stress in the workplace. Again, my job is stressful. That suggests this unending event of stress throughout the day. And if we cultivate this set of activities that will support our return to this sense of calm, it becomes less overwhelming. Your body knows. Even if you don't consciously know that you're in stress, your body knows. Your body also knows when it's in a state of calm. What we're going to try and do is begin to bring that into our awareness, to be intentional about the things that we do to tell our body that it's okay to relax. It's okay to be calm. This is all part of how we start to begin to be careful with ourselves. So this was an overview of CE-CERT skills. I want to share with you how to stay in touch with us if you haven't yet. Please go to the ARBEST website. It's listed here on this slide. And then also you can follow us on our Facebook page. We post updates there now regularly that we have Laura with us. We have a webinar code that will be helpful if you want a CEU, and Alyssa has dropped some additional information for our 6-hour CE-CERT training that's coming up. And I'm checking to see if we've got any Q&A. Hey, Mary, thank you for that. The slides being emailed. We actually do not share the slides and content of a CE-CERT training. We can share some handouts that could be helpful, as well as some self-evaluations, and we're happy to send that information out. I'll just give a few more minutes to see if any other questions come through. And then I'm unsure, Laura, do you have any other information to, provide?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if you're interested in getting a CEU for attending this webinar, the code for today is 5240. So after we're done here, I'll send out an email with a survey to everybody who registered and attended. And then you can fill out that survey with the code 5240, and you'll get a CEU emailed to you. The formatting of the survey works best for a computer and not a mobile device. So if you're using the mobile device, please know that there's 5 options to choose from, and you may have to scroll to the side to get your answers. I think we have that slide. If you could just keep that up for a moment with that code, just in case anybody didn't get it, 5240. Or actually, I'll just go ahead and put it in. There we go. Awesome.
And I see LaQuisha asked, no, Joy asked, is the training only in person? The upcoming training that we shared information about in the chat is in person. However, we will be offering virtual trainings at some point in the future. That has not been scheduled yet, however. I'm glad that y'all found some of this content helpful. So we have a question: if feeling overwhelmed, where's a good starting point to start getting better at regulating throughout the day? Meditation, self-assessment, a break, etc. So would you like to have a chance to answer that, Alyssa?
Yeah. I think an important skill that CE-CERT teaches is awareness. So even becoming aware of when you're feeling dysregulated, what are the moments or situations that's happening? And I think asking yourself the question of, am I allowing myself to feel those feelings? CE-CERT really proposes and emphasizes this idea that sometimes the act of not allowing ourselves to experience those emotions is actually what's causing our distress. And paying attention to your narrative. I certainly think that taking breaks, if you can be helpful in exhaling, as Kelly was mentioning, within parasympathetic recovery. But I think what's nice about CE-CERT is that it's not, there's a right way to do it. There's not one thing that works for everybody. Do you have any other thoughts, Kelly?
I think it would be important to start to recognize when and what might be causing the overwhelm. I think that has a lot to do with how you might start addressing it. The only other thing I might add to that is social connection with people who understand your mission or your vocation is the #1 most protective factor against things like secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, as it's traditionally sort of understood, in burnout. And so if you do not have a group of people who are like-minded and who understand the work that you do, to sort of try and seek that out and cultivate for yourself a support system. And it's important that those people do understand the work that you do, because in that way you can share sort of a shorthand, if that makes sense. And there's a deeper understanding of the impact that this work can have on you. And so if you have not done that, I would strongly encourage you to start thinking about how you might cultivate that for yourself. If you're in a position, I know many of us, especially in our state, are in rural places, and so it can be very challenging to make connections with other clinicians or other people who do the kind of work that we do. And so if you're struggling with that, I strongly encourage you to reach out to one of us, someone on the ARBEST team, a previous supervisor, someone who you might have a level of trust in, and we can start thinking together about how to do that for you.
And I saw Mary is interested in knowing how to get in contact with somebody if you're wanting a department-wide training. I'm going to paste in the chat here the ARBEST email address. So you have any questions about ARBEST trainings or anything that you see on our newsletter or anything about trainings, not just CE-CERT, feel free to send us an email there. We just recently became trained in this framework and have spent the last couple years disseminating this information. And so we're working on doing more webinars, doing more trainings, and would be happy to explore doing some trainings for specific organizations. I think we answered all of the questions so far that have come through.
I think so.
Great. Well, thank you again, Dr. Wilburn and Kelly. Our next webinar is going to be May 29th at noon, and the topic is about reflective practice for program development and policy. So we hope to see you all there next month. Thank you, everybody, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.